If you like the Young Turks podcast, I think you'll love a lot of the podcasts on the TYT network. Old School, it's one of my favorites, one of the favorites for a lot of the listeners. Please check that out, subscribe, share it. That makes a big difference, and give it a 5-star rating. Thank you. All right, back on the Young Turks from the new year break, I guess. I mean, in the habit of saying back on the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian, Happy New Year, everybody. Happy new decade. May it be an actual good one. Wouldn't that be amazing if we had a good decade?
I'm having a good year so far.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
yeah.
We're off to a good start.
Started reading The Subtle Art. The book that you talk about all the time, but I can't say the full title on the show.
Isn't that a good book?
It's an excellent book. It's the only self-help book I like because it comes from a very pessimistic perspective on humanity, which is the right perspective to have.
It was helpful to me too. I mean, this is a random plug, but Subtle Art of Not Giving a, okay?
Yeah.
Check it out. All right, so by the way, while you're checking out books, shoptyt.com has several books, including from our guests, including Ryan Grimm's great book, We've Got People. Lots of stories today, a lot of folks dropping out, you'll see in a second. A lot of campaign news, Biden, Bernie, etc. And then, of course, you can't go without some Trump news in the show, obviously. But since this is our first minute in the first new year, I'm just gonna quickly say, 2020 is everything. Okay, it's everything.
Yep, you're right.
So everything will be decided in 2020, and then we'll either have pessimism for the rest of a long time, or we'll have optimism, and we'll have hope. Not only hope, we'll be in charge. So meaning Bernie Sanders winning the presidency, on and on and on. So it's everything. And speaking of which, a little bit later in the show, update on our climate reporter that I think you guys are going to love. Strike one for optimism.
All right, and then one other announcement before we get to our stories. You should be working with a financial institution that actually wants to do good things with your money, that will not invest in the fossil fuel industry, and that financial institution is Aspiration. So if you want to learn more, go to aspiration.com/TYT, where you can store your money in an ethical way. All right, so let's get to some of the news today. Julian Castro has announced that he is suspending his campaign for president. He has decided to end his presidential bid following a crowded Democratic primary, as we all know, where he failed to garner enough financial support or enough support in the polls. And he released a video explaining this in a little more detail. Take a look.
It's time for the Democratic Party to change the way that we do our presidential nominating process.
I'm so proud of the campaign we've run together. We've shaped the conversation on so many important issues in this race, stood up for the most vulnerable people, and given a voice to those who are often forgotten. But with only a month until the Iowa caucuses, and given the circumstances of this campaign season, I've determined that it simply isn't our time. So today it's with a heavy heart and with profound gratitude that I will suspend my campaign for president.
So he shared that video on Twitter, and he also included a tweet that read, "It's with profound gratitude to all of our supporters that I suspend my campaign for president today. I'm so proud of everything we've accomplished together. I'm going to keep fighting for an America where everyone counts. I hope you'll join me in that fight." Now, he was the head of HUD under the Obama administration, and to be quite honest with you, that's nothing to write home about, especially with the housing crisis that we have throughout the country, the rise in homelessness. However, I do think that he provided some important points and some important topics when he was on the debate stage. He really did draw attention to a very real issue we have in America when it comes to police brutality, and he certainly did attack Biden from the left, so I appreciated that as well.
So first the goofy points. I like how he suspended his campaign with a smile too. Like, I'm suspending my campaign. I know it's old footage, but it was just a little bit of fun. And I assume that his brother Joaquin Castro's beard is now also suspended. Because his brother's a US congressman and his campaign manager, they're twins. And so everybody kept confusing them, especially in the spin room. So his brother grew a beard so they'd stop calling him Julian.
That's hilarious.
And so Joaquin, you get to finally shave your beard. Congrats. Okay, obviously not the result that you wanted. I'm gonna get into the politics of it in a second, but first the most important point. He actually did a great job. it's not just whether you win or not. It's what do you do in the campaign. And Julian Castro pushed the party to the left, and he was fantastic in fighting for expanded liberty for everyone, and that's what progressives do. And so, and he fought for justice, and especially on the issue of immigration, he was more progressive than almost anyone else in the race, and he moved the national conversation, which I think is monumentally important, the most important thing you could do other than winning a presidential campaign. So whereas a lot of people ran on, hey, I'd like to be president and I have the same exact policies as everybody else in the race, he was bold and he ran with an actual agenda, and I think he made a difference.
Yeah, look, I think that he wasn't my preferred candidate, obviously. I want someone who has a long track record, a very consistent track record of progressive ideology and someone who pushes for progressive policies, and that's Bernie Sanders. However, I do think that it's important to note that there are people who might not get our endorsement on that debate stage who bring up important points, right?
Yep.
So look, I've said repeatedly on this show that while I don't have a problem with UBI as part of a more comprehensive economic proposal, I don't agree with the way Andrew Yang wants to go forward with it, right? Mm-hmm. However, he brings up all sorts of issues on the debate stage that I absolutely love, and he makes the conversation better, right? Julian Castro did the same thing. There are other candidates who do the same thing. It's not just about having the person you like on that debate stage. It's about having people who bring up important points and move the party to the left. And I think you're right, when it comes to certain issues, whether it's policing in America or immigration, Julian Castro did bring the party to the left.
Yeah, and he also fought really valiantly on reparations as well, made a lot of good points there. And to your point, Anna, another outsider who did a great job on that was Marianne Williamson. There's a little bit of news about her today. She has apparently fired her national staff. It's probably a prelude to dropping out as well. But on the debate stage, she made a wonderful point. I thought she made a lot of good points. And there's a lot of snark regarding her because she's spiritual, and so and the national media is so deeply cynical about everything. So they're like, oh, she's trying to change the world for the positive. Obviously, we despise her, right? But she said on the issue, a very serious issue of reparations, a debt is owed. And actually that is both factually true and numerically true if you look at the history of what happened with slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, etc. So I thought she made an important contribution, as did Julian Castro. So I love the outsider voices. Julian Castro, not really an outsider, but still did a great job of going to the left in this context. Now, to get a little cynical about the political maneuvering, right? Because that's also reality, and that's also part of the equation here. He challenged Beto O'Rourke in the debates. He also challenged Buttigieg and Biden. Now, what that normally means is that he is in the lower tier, and it's not really even fair to call him lower tier. He was in the middle tier of candidates. That might mean that you're angling for a vice presidential spot. And the one candidate he almost never criticized and had actually a lot of praise for was Elizabeth Warren. And if you're looking at it just strictly from a political point of view, that's a fairly logical play. If I was advising him, just based on politics, I'd probably advise him to do the same.
Yeah, I would actually like to go to the last graphic of this story because it's a tweet that Castro had put out in regard to Elizabeth Warren. And he said, Warren has got a great team over there. She is fantastic. I think she has done a very impressive job on the campaign trail. I think right now she's doing a fantastic job of fusing her biography with her policies. And so, it's funny because I'm usually the type of person who's skeptical of anything that anyone says on social media, especially politicians. But I didn't think about the possibility of Castro angling for a position in her cabinet if she won.
Or VP.
Or VP,
because,
yeah.
And why Warren instead of Sanders, for example, if he's going left? Well, Warren is more likely to pick a male VP. Bernie Sanders is more likely to pick a female VP. Mm-hmm. They're both probably going to look at minorities, not necessarily, but like that certainly would be something they would consider. So Julian Castro would be perfect for Elizabeth Warren running mate. And so him, heading in that direction rhetorically during his run is logical. Look, if it was because he didn't mean his positions, then I would be very much against it, right? But if he means it and then he angles for something that's logical politically, I can live with that as long as your policies are right and you're driving the conversation in a positive direction, which he clearly was.
Yeah, I see a lot of people responding to his Twitter announcement about his suspension or suspending his campaign with you should endorse Bernie, right? And then I'm like, is that a possibility? Maybe. I mean, who knows? But
well, I mean, a lot of the folks who dropped out eventually are likely to endorse people. If I was him, and all I cared about was politics, I wouldn't do that yet because he's probably still angling for Warren, and if he's going to endorse anyone, it would probably be her. But at this point, Bernie's leading and Warren isn't. So if all you care about is the politics, you'd hold a little longer.
Yeah. All right, we have all sorts of election-related news today. We're gonna take a very brief break. Actually, it's not gonna be very brief. It's gonna be as long as all of our breaks are, about 4 minutes. But when we come back, we have more news for you, including Bernie Sanders killing it when it comes to fundraising and the way the media is covering it. I mean, you can guess. So we're gonna go after them on that.
I love that story. Love it. All right, we'll be right back.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of On the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be. Featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity, the UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. The mathematician says, Happy New Year, Cenk and Anna. I can't think of a better pair I need to have lead me through the daily torrent of dog crap that will be the 2020 news cycle. Yeah, I hear you on that, but you know what? There's some chance, again, that 2020 could be an awesome year and perhaps not be full of dog crap for the first time in a long, long time. So I think you should dare to be a little hopeful this year. I'm not saying it's definitely going to turn out that way, but if we work super hard, it really might.
Yeah, my hope really hinges on how aggressively progressives are willing to fight. And the fight doesn't just include defending the candidate you prefer, Bernie Sanders, or the congressional candidates you prefer. It's also about not allowing corporate media to distract you with the smears against people that you would typically like, right?
And the nonsense propaganda about electability.
Yes.
I mean, I wanna, you know what? I wanna talk about that a little bit more in the post game today. So TYT.com/join to talk about that. All right, Gabby Marita says, Julian Castro is the only candidate in the debate so far bold enough to point out that Joe Biden is going senile. I know it cost him pretty severely in the polls, but I'm still really glad that he did it because it's obvious. Look, I don't know about senile, and I do know that Biden does have some issues that you see popping up on camera from time to time. I don't know how much it cost Julian Castro, but I do want to talk about it a little bit in the context of the fundraising story, which we're going to get to in just 1 second. And then finally, Tom Zawacki on Twitter says, it's really too bad when the amount of money behind you is directly proportionate to your popularity in a political race. Get money out of politics. Well, actually, we're going to talk about that as well in a second, because now that Bernie Sanders has raised the most money, some are beginning to say, well, I mean, small dollar donations. Is that really indicative?
I can't
unreal. All right, Anna, take it away.
All right. There's no shortage of online videos featuring Joe Biden saying uncomfortable things, stuff that would typically destroy the candidacy of any other individual. However, there was recently a viral video that took Joe Biden out of context. It was deceptively edited, and it made it appear as though Biden was arguing that the culture in the US is specifically European culture. It seemed like he was celebrating European white culture in the United States while saying something negative about African American culture. However, the fuller context gives you a completely different sense of what Biden meant and what he was talking about. Now, I want to be clear, the video that we're about to toss to is the deceptively edited video. I want you to see what it looked like so you get an understanding of why it went viral. Then I'm going to give you the fuller context. Take a look.
The culture, our culture, our culture. It's not imported from some African nation or some Asian nation. It's our English jurisprudential culture, our European culture.
I gotta be honest, I saw that video and I was like, what is he doing? Like, why is he doing this? Why does he keep saying things that make him incredibly unelectable in my book, right? But it turns out that it was taken out of context. And so let me give you a little bit of context before we go to the full context of the video. Tommy Christopher over at Mediaite wrote, Biden was asked by a woman in the crowd, could you speak to your work with women and sexual assault, domestic violence, and give us an idea of your vision for that in our country? Biden launched into a nearly 15-minute response that began with the premise that ending violence against women is about fundamentally changing our culture in America. Biden cited the rule of thumb narrative to describe the tolerance of violence against women in Old English common law. Now with that, I'll give you a fuller look into what Biden was talking about. Take a look.
In the late 1300s in England, so many wives were being beaten to death by their husbands that the court of common law said, because women were considered to be a chattel, just like the horse or the cows or the animals in the field, for real. And a man was able to, quote, chastise his wife. But so many were being beaten to death that the court ruled in the late 1300s that no man could beat his wife with a rod bigger than the circumference of his thumb. We have a cultural problem, a cultural problem. So when I got to the United States Senate, I started working on the issue of whether or not we can begin to change the way, and there was a dirty little secret. Those of you who are older know, everybody knew somebody whose wife got slapped around.
So he was actually making kind of a bold and courageous point about how the culture of Western culture had created problems. Now, look, for progressives, that's not a controversial point. Of course it's true, and by the way, all cultures have different things that are wonderfully positive and things that are negative. And so heritage by definition doesn't mean something that's positive. It could be very, very negative in every culture. And so, but these are things that politicians usually try to avoid, especially more centrist and conservative Democrats like Biden, because they don't want to get criticized by the right wing, say, oh, now you're criticizing Western culture, I can't believe it, etc. So he was doing the right thing, saying, no, look, we have problems with the culture that we inherited, and some of these is the domestic violence that he was talking about. So there's nothing wrong with what he said. He wasn't trying to criticize African or Chinese culture, he was criticizing the culture that created what we have today in this country. And so now, I think when I first saw the story, I didn't bother reading it, and maybe I could be wrong. I saw the headline, but I thought that seems like it's not possible. Okay, and I know Joe Biden says some things that seem not possible and then turn out to be true. But my radar went off a little bit, like that doesn't look right.
No, I hear you, and you should always be skeptical of these like tightly edited videos, especially on platforms like Twitter. As we know, people get taken out of context all the time, and so you should look for fuller context, get a real understanding of what that individual is talking about, especially in politics. Now, the one thing I will say though is, while I would be skeptical, I also don't think that anything's impossible with Biden, because let's keep it real. Homeboy was talking about kids sitting in his lap playing with his blonde leg hair in the pool. Like,
yeah, and told a story about Corn Pop the gangster with no sense of irony or anything along those lines. Talked about how busing is wrong, and I mean, and how he liked working with Strom Thurmond, who ran on a segregationist ticket. So I understand that if anybody was going to make a comment as outrageous as the edited comment sounded, it might have been Biden, but even with him, I would have thought that was, because it's Steve King-esque. It's so outrageous that it reminds you of extreme right wingers, and I don't think that Biden is there. Anyway, but guys, it's really important this is a good story to point out that context is always important. And so you should, and I hope that the mainstream media, which leapt to Biden's defense, I think rightfully so, would care about context in all of the presidential candidates and all of their statements, et cetera. But oftentimes, some folks are taken out of context, and then you don't get this kind of clarity. And when it's an establishment presidential candidate, you have the media in unison, yelling about context, which is great. I don't want them not to do that. I do want them to do that. That's good journalism. Please be even-handed and do that in other instances when it comes to progressive candidates as well.
If the corporate media were as obsessed with getting every story right, especially on progressive candidates, as they were with this Joe Biden story, this country would be in a much better place, right? And so, look, I have two main points. Point number one is there's no need to take Biden out of context, because who he is and what he represents is so antiquated for the Democratic Party that you don't need to do it. Don't take him out of context, just represent him as he is, because he's not a desirable candidate for many Democrats, okay? So don't buy into this myth that centrism is more electable. That is not the case, and if you look at recent fundraising numbers, there's proof to that, right? So Bernie Sanders is killing it and has beaten everyone when it comes to small dollar donors, right? He's outraised everyone, and the average donation is $18 per individual. Now, with that said, though, it's just amazing how quickly the establishment, like the congressional leadership, will jump to Biden's defense. I mean, impeachment was out of the question until Biden's name was mentioned, and all of a sudden they're like, we need to pursue impeachment. They didn't care about Trump's financial crimes. When it came to defending Biden against Trump, that was when they jumped to action. And when it comes to the establishment media, if Biden is being taken out of context, they can't wait to jump on that story. And I actually wanna flesh this out in more detail later in the show. I'll do that on my own, because I wanna give you specific examples to kind of juxtapose how the media handled this story versus how they've handled a different story.
Okay, so I do wanna give you one specific example though. In one of the recent debates, I think it was the last one, PBS debate, Bernie Sanders started answering a question about race while talking about climate change. He was leading up to how it affects minority groups worse. But the moderator in that case cut him off and said, hey, this was a question about race. And we said live as we were covering that, they're gonna take him out of context. They're not gonna give the rest of his answer. And then later, as we were covering the post-debate coverage, we showed you articles, including CNN, with a big headline saying, Bernie Sanders answers question about race, and avoids the question and talks about climate change, and the moderator busts him, right? So where was everybody jumping to Bernie Sanders' defense?
Of course they wouldn't.
Not only did they not jump to his defense, they all saw it with their own eyes. We all watched it together. If you're a CNN reporter, you obviously watched the debate. You obviously saw the rest of his answer, and you saw where he was going before he was cut off, but they didn't give it context on purpose.
By the way, to that point, one of my very good friends who is a Bernie Sanders supporter talked to me following that debate and said to me, yeah, it seemed like Bernie wasn't interested in answering the questions that the moderators were throwing to him. Yeah. And then specifically mentioned the climate change situation, right?
And that's how, because most people don't watch all the debates. They see the headlines. And so in this case, somebody takes Biden out of context, the media rightfully jumps in and goes, no, wrong. Everybody gets, oh, that was a doctored video, etc. right? When the Bernie Sanders case, they do the exact opposite. Everybody's like, he didn't answer the question about race. He didn't answer it. Well, that's actually not true. It's the opposite of what's true. Because they not only don't mind smearing progressives and taking them out of context, they enjoy it. They think that that's a great thing to do. All right, look, in terms of Biden, they actually go further. So this is fair. On the other hand, now a lot of these guys are saying, when Biden said that he would consider picking a Republican for vice president, now a bunch of establishment media people are saying you're not allowed to quote that. What? And they're like, oh no, because he clarified later that he couldn't name one Republican that he would pick at this moment. So you're not allowed to say the earlier part of the statement where he said, oh, well, I would definitely consider one. No, that's insane. We gave the full context. He did say it. So now you want to disqualify things that he actually did say in order to protect him because that's incredibly damaging. So there's no end to the bias. And then when you point this out with indisputable facts, they're like, I don't see it. What bias? I don't see it at all, right? But for us as progressives, we should not stoop to what they do. Okay, so I have no idea who basically unfairly edited this video. No idea if it was a right winger, a Trump supporter, or progressive. I have no idea. Nobody does, right? But don't do that, okay? Because we're the good guys. So we do, as Anna pointed out earlier, you don't have to take Biden or anyone else out of context. You can just give the actual quotes. My God, if the media would actually cover what Biden has said and done, we'd be in amazing shape if they talked about the bankruptcy bill, among 1,000 other things that we've mentioned here. But they never ever bring up the bankruptcy bill. Why do students have all this debt that they can't get rid of? A huge part of the reason is because of Joe Biden. Can you just actually quote Joe Biden rather than either taking him out of context or weirdly defending him for no reason when you're a reporter?
Exactly. By the way, for any of you who are interested in hearing Nina Turner's take on how that debate question went down for Bernie Sanders, David Dayen actually interviewed her in the spin room on our behalf after the last debate. So check that out. We'll include a link in the description box below. But you're absolutely right, Cenk. Look, we need to win based on our ideas, and our ideas are popular. There's no need to stoop to the disgusting level of the corporate press, which I'm not buying this whole thing about like, they try to like push this idea of like plausible deniability. No, it's intentional, it's malicious. Cenk is right. We all sat there and watched the exact same debate, and the corporate press decided to portray it the way that they did, right? So intentional, malicious.
Yeah, sorry, one last important example of taking things out of context. Almost all the corporate media in unison has now spent untold millions of dollars doing propaganda against Medicare for all by saying it would take away your private insurance. But you want to talk about context, they never finished a sentence, but it would replace it with better insurance that has expanded coverage. You want to talk about out of context? That's insanity. It's like saying, hey, somebody's taking $10 away from you, but leaving out the part where they give you $20, right? Well, that would be very important context, right?
Yes.
But the media is lying about that in mass and has been for about a year. And what does that do? It skews the debate. It totally benefits the conservative Democrats and the Republicans and the insurance companies that are their top advertisers, and it does it on purpose.
So let's move on to Bernie Sanders and how he's killing it with fundraising and with his proposals and with everything he does. Except he needs to be more of an attack dog. We'll get to that later. So Bernie Sanders has outraised every single Democratic contender in the primaries. And that's unsurprising when you consider his popularity, when you consider the number of his small dollar donors. And so just to give you some numbers, he has raised a whopping $34.5 million in the fourth quarter of 2019. Again, he outraised every other candidate, and he talks about it a little bit in this next clip. Take a look.
As of yesterday, which was the FEC filing deadline, we have received over 5 million contributions from well over 1.2 million people all across this country. And you know what? That is more contributions from more people than any candidate, not just in this campaign, but any candidate in the history of American politics. And when we talk about the political revolution, we're talking about two basic concepts. Number one, an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families and is prepared to take on the greed and corruption of the corporate elite. And that's Wall Street and the insurance companies, the drug companies, fossil fuel industry, military industrial complex, prison industrial complex.
So, okay, that video is everything about Bernie Sanders.
So 100%. Okay. No glitz, no glam. His jacket's a little dirty.
Okay.
I got things to do, okay? I'm gonna tell you about how we're killing it. Small dollar donors, F the corporate world, we're coming for them.
He didn't even say it that way. He just said it's so calm. So, like, in a second, we're gonna show you a mainstream media person saying that Bernie Sanders is not about the policies. People like him for other reasons. What other reasons? Okay, like Julian Castro, even in the video announcing he's dropping out, and we like Julian Castro, but he's smiling. It's a wonderfully produced video. I'm dropping out, right?
Yeah.
Bernie's like, whatever. I broke a record. This is a giant tire next to me. I'm accidentally covering up the URL of my website that's on the bus. Right? Like, you see what I'm saying?
I love him because he's got stuff to do, right? It's not about, like, look, we had a long conversation about the Julian Castro story. You should watch it. This is not indicative of the entire conversation, but like, yeah, the victorious music in the background, like, there's none of that with Bernie. It's about the people, it's about the policies, it's about fighting for the right reasons, and that's why we love him.
Yeah, guys, I think what's being understated in this video, as well as certainly in all the media, is he broke a record. Yeah. He broke a record of number of donations for any presidential candidate up to this point before the primary started. I mean, by a lot, okay?
But is he electable, Cenk?
I know, how could he have 5 million donations from 1.2 million different people in the country? And we're having a conversation about whether he's electable as opposed to whether he's gonna crush everything in his path. And the idea that it's not even an idea, it's a propaganda that the corporate media tells you is, well, we don't know if independents and centrists will support a guy who's for the little guy and for the average American worker. I mean, that's probably not gonna work.
So who are you gonna support, Trump?
But on the other hand, Joe Biden, who loves to take money from corporate America, I bet the independents love him. And they say it with a straight face, and they 100% mean it. It is unbelievable. So as you know, they're going to get into the fundraising numbers of everybody. We're going to explain that in a second. But overall, the context has been like, oh yeah, okay, I guess Bernie did well too. But okay, let's get back to how well Buttigieg did.
No, I mean, look, I actually wouldn't mind if that was the way that it were covered, but that is not the way the story is covered. They just bury the lead. A lot of headlines don't even mention how much money Bernie has raised and how he's beaten every other candidate in the field.
It's a record. What else do you want from the guy? And he's breaking his own record.
Right.
All right, but let's give everybody's numbers.
Sure. So coming in at, let me just remind you, Bernie raised $34.5 million in the fourth quarter of 2019. At the same period, you have Buttigieg coming in second at 24.7 million, and then Biden is third with 22.7 million, and then Yang comes in fourth at 16.5 million. Now I want to be clear, Warren hasn't released her numbers yet, so we don't know where she stands. My guess is she did not beat Bernie Sanders, because if that were the case, she would have put that out already.
No, she's even indicated she's not gonna reach the numbers she had in the last quarter where she did really well. So she's gonna come in around the Biden-Buttigieg numbers, maybe even a little lower and above Yang. So that's what it looks like right now. Look, and let's be fair about a couple of other amazing stories out of that, okay? So one is Biden's not doing as well as Buttigieg, which is weird. So, and he did better this time around than in the last quarter, but he has had trouble raising money in the context of presidential races and as the leader in the national polling, right? So one important story you get out of that is, do the donors see Biden and think there's something wrong here?
100%.
Right? So that's a big story that people aren't really talking about. They're talking about his donors and how he's not raising enough money. To be fair, they are talking about that, right? But they're not talking about why. What is it that is freaking out the donors that see him up close and in person, right? But other stories that are positive Our Buttigieg did raise a lot of money for a mayor of a tiny little town in the middle of the country that wasn't involved in politics. That is a gigantic amount of money he raised. And remember, he didn't run for president before like Bernie Sanders did. He didn't have the donors that Elizabeth Warren had as a senator. So it's fair to point that out. It's also fair to point out that a lot of his donors are from wine caves.
Yes.
Right, and they're big bundlers. And by the way, people mention bundlers and then give their names without giving the context of why they're bundling. A lot of those folks are lobbyists and they represent certain industries. I mean, we're gonna get to a comical complaint about how Bernie Sanders' 1.2 million donors are too white. Okay, did you see the picture in the wine cave? But yet there's not much discussion about, hey, are the corporate bundlers too white, right? I mean, how's that for irony? But give credit where credit is due. Buttigieg is apparently amazing at raising money from rich folks, and now some not rich folks as well. Full context. And finally, the other amazing number is Yang's. Oh my God, out of nowhere, Andrew Yang, dismissed by all the national media forever and ever and ever, derided throughout even when he was doing well, $16.5 million without ever being in politics. How the hell did he do that? That should be a story in and of itself where everybody be like, holy cow, Yang raises 16.5 million, and I haven't seen that story almost anywhere.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's almost as if the corporate press ignoring a candidate works in the candidate's favor, right? Because they did dismiss Yang, but he persisted, and he does bring interesting ideas to the table. So I think this is a fascinating story. I do have one other thing to bring up though, because remember, Warren has made a political calculation that we've talked about on this show before. She's moved a little away from some of the hardcore progressive policies like Medicare for All. Her transition plan for Medicare for All is a disaster. We've talked about that in great detail. And I think that political calculation was to attract some of the Obama administration officials who she wanted endorsements from. And hundreds of them have decided to endorse Warren. But it apparently hasn't worked to her favor because she's continuously sliding in the polls. And as we can tell from this story about fundraising, she's not raising as much money as she did previously when she was really pushing for these progressive proposals. Look, this isn't to knock Warren, this is more about providing even more evidence that progressive policies are popular. They're popular. So if you think that it's a good political strategy to move away from those policies, I think we have yet another example of how that's not the case.
100%. And look, that's why we said, I don't know, who's advising her and why she's gone in this direction. But so what if you have 200 Obama officials supporting you? What does that get you? Does it get you more money? Obviously it didn't. Does it get you higher numbers in the polling, which is the most important thing in terms of when you actually go to the election? Are you gonna get more votes or not? No, it's hurt you. So I don't know who convinced her that, oh my God, not Obama, but Obama administration officials. If you get more people in the establishment to back you, it'll work out great for you. How's that working out? So if you're in the Warren camp, be careful about the next set of advice those guys give you.
All right, so we're gonna take a break, and then when we come back, we're going to compare the way we covered this story to how the corporate press has covered this story, and it is incredible. All right.
Yeah, you're gonna love that / hate it. So come.
At TYT, we frequently talk about all the ways that big tech companies are taking control of our online lives, constantly monitoring us and storing and selling our data. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. It's possible to stay anonymous online and hide your data from the prying eyes of big tech. And one of the best ways is with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making your activity more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And it's also easy to install. A single mouse click protects all your devices. But listen guys, this is important. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET and Wired magazine. So take back control of your life online and secure your data with a top VPN solution available, ExpressVPN. And if you go to expressvpn.com/TYT, you can get 3 extra months for free with this exclusive link just for TYT fans. That's expressvpn.com/TYT. Check it out today.
I'm right back. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, Become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back in the Young Turks. Let me read you a number of member comments first. So Mondo Libre says about Joe Biden, still won't vote for him, but tip of the hat to TYT for keeping it real. Okay.
Always.
Meg says, Bernie outraising every primary candidate, AOC outraising everyone in the House. It's almost as if people like representatives who fight for them. Seems like a good point. Our planet is our temple and our temple is our prize, writes in. Happy New Year to the TYT team. I want you guys to know you made an unbearable year bearable. To 2019, bye Felicia. We love you guys and this year is it and this decade is our time. Don't stop, we're surging. Hashtag Bernie 2020, hashtag TYT Army, hashtag too strong. And last one's from YouTube Super Chat. Brunley A. Levros says, happy TYT, happy new year. Oh, sorry, hey TYT, happy new year. Proud to be a new member. Thank you, Brunley, for using YouTube Super Chat and being a new member. tyt.com/join, or if you want to be a member on YouTube, you can click the join button underneath the video. Okay, now on to really good news. So we were doing a campaign to hire a climate reporter. We were trying to get to $200,000. Here's my latest news on that. We did it. Okay, it seemed pretty much impossible, but somehow, miraculously, we got to it. And I'm gonna tell you how we got to it, okay? So we were trying to get to 200 by the end of the year, but we hadn't made it. And we were, a good chunk short.
We had about like 178,000 or?
Yeah, around that ballpark, okay? And so we're like, no, we got up to 182, almost 183, okay? And so we're like, hey man, it was a good run, but it oh well, right? Until all of a sudden it hit 200. So what happened? Well, Mark Kellman, who's in Hawaii, I don't know why all the great guys are in Hawaii, but anyway, was like, I think I'm gonna top it off.
No, it's amazing.
Okay. So TYT members are unbelievable. So Mark explained in the emails that he wrote, he's like, I'm not a billionaire or anything like that. Right. He ran a club in Chicago and nightclub, and he tried to make it more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. He was early on tried to end smoking at the club little by little, etc. Just a good guy, now working on farming in Hawaii in a way that is environmentally conscious, etc. And he's like, but look, when I give, I try to make a big impact and as much as I possibly can. And thank you, Mark, thank you. You guys' generosity is amazing. And look, we feel a really heavy responsibility to deliver for you guys. So this reporter's job is to make sure that we connect the dots and tell you why we're not taking action on climate change. It isn't because not enough Americans agree, 3/4 of Americans agree. It's because of the money, it's the money, and we're gonna show that to you guys through the reporting and the facts that we're gonna bring. I wanna give a couple of quotes from Mark. He said, I'm just a guy trying to do my best and give gratitude to the earth for all the gifts that it provides us every day. And he also said, together we're gonna bring sanity back to this country, power to the people and peace to our planet.
Yes.
So thank you, Mark. But guys, I also want to thank the 6,337 other donors. Okay, so you see 6338 with Mark being the last one. Okay, but every one of you gave with the most you could within your budget, and that makes just as big of a difference. Okay,
and I love that you guys are funding independent media that gets to actually do real journalism without fear of censorship. Like, we report to you guys, and that is my favorite part of working here, to be honest.
Yeah, every day I see you guys create a different miracle. So I'm in awe of it. And I was thinking earlier today as to like, what do I most want to do? And the reality is the connective tissue of all my work, including and predominantly the Young Turks, is to empower you guys. We're not in it for power for us. We're in it for power for you guys. Because once we empower you, then I could retire. Okay, I have this vision and this dream of going to a cafe and you never see me again, etc. Because the point is to give power back to you guys by reclaiming democracy, by getting money out of politics, saving the planet through actions like this, empowering you guys to do more and more content for us, which we'll do throughout 2020. Change is coming. So Mark and all of the rest of you, all the 6,337 others that gave, thank you for making that possible. And Mark wouldn't have given that if you hadn't brought it to 183 in the first place, right? So you guys are amazing, and we're gonna try to deliver as best as we can for you.
Yeah.
And that's why we say we're not the Young Turks, you're the Young Turks.
All right, well, let's talk about corporate funded media and,
what they do instead.
The way that they cover things.
Yes.
All right, so in the fourth quarter of 2019, Bernie Sanders outraised every other Democratic contender. He raised $34.5 million in 1 quarter. That's pretty incredible, right? Except all the corporate press has either ignored this story, or they've decided to bury the lead, or they've decided to insult Bernie Sanders. And a good example of that is actually a conversation that went down on Morning Joe. There was a pundit on by the name of Jason Johnson. He's actually on MSNBC quite a bit, on Joy Reid's show quite a bit. And here's what he has to say in the context of a story regarding Bernie Sanders outraising all the other contenders with small dollar donors, by the way. Average donation is $18. Take a look.
The idea there was going to be a progressive battle between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, it was never something that had much resonance with me, because that presumes that Bernie Sanders supporters are supporting him primarily for policy purposes, and that's not really what's going on. A lot of his core base support like him because they see him as sort of a political and democratic savior type character. So he was always going to end up winning out any sort of policy argument, because in the end of the day, people they like Bernie, and they're Bernie or bust kind of people.
MSNBC and pundits like Jason Johnson always fascinate me because they never have to cite any evidence when they make dumb arguments like that. Where is the evidence that indicates that Bernie Sanders supporters don't like him based on his policies? So what do they like him for? His haircut? The way he dresses? What is it that you think that people like about him other than his policies? His policies, that is the meat behind Bernie's campaign. That is what people love about him. The fact that he actually has the audacity to hope for a better country, to hope for a system that doesn't leave Americans to die because they don't have adequate coverage with their privatized health insurance.
So he said near the end there, he was always gonna win out because his supporters view him as some sort of savior. So that part has 2 parts that are amazing. I wanna start with the savior part. Okay, Jason, then why? Why do they view him as a savior? Is it because of his clothing? I mean, is it a random fact? Or could it be that they think he's the only honest politician because he doesn't take corporate PAC money, he doesn't take lobbyist money, and he hasn't changed his position in 40 years. Oh, right, the positions. Well, do they agree with the positions or don't they? If you had a candidate who hasn't changed their position in 40 years, but he was for having more fossil fuel money in politics and not fighting climate change very aggressively, like Hickenlooper. He drank fracking fluid and he still loves fracking, right? So are people going nuts over Hickenlooper? Progressives going nuts over Hickenlooper, going, oh my God, yes, he is so consistent on being pro fossil fuels, right? No, nobody's interested in that. Bernie Sanders has been for single payer for 40 years. Other people have been for private insurance for 40 years, but we're not excited about them. Why do we, if you think that people think that Bernie Sanders is a savior, did it not occur to you as a journalist to ask, gee, I wonder why, right? And the answer is so obvious. Because of the policy and because of how honest he is. But instead of giving that as a credit to him on a day that he breaks a record on fundraising from so many different people, you use it as a way to dismiss him. Now, let me get to the second part, because there's this hilarious video surfaced by
David Dole.
David Dole, the Rational National. You should check out his show on YouTube, of the same pundit about a year ago. Now, if you notice in that clip today, he said he was always going to win out because a lot of people think he's a savior. Well, let's go back a year and see what Jason Johnson thought back then.
If you were to create the worst possible 3-week period for his presidential campaign, it would be the launch of the person you share the most ideological space with, Elizabeth Warren, and the fact you've had to defend yourself against the perception that your supporters are very anti-woman.
He's done. And I was
really?
Yeah,
you think he's done?
I think
wow.
He's done. I was literally having this discussion with a good contact of mine who's on the campaign. I was like, I see Bernie Sanders launching his campaign, and by August realizing he won't be in the top 5 in Iowa and dropping out. I don't think he'll get that far.
I have to make one quick point. Notice he gets invited on. Like, he was so devastatingly wrong. Like, the whole point of bringing analysts and pundits on is because they're the experts who can really give you the behind the scenes look, what's really going on. They can break down politics for you. I mean, that was an inaccurate take, to say the least. I'm being gentle here, right? But he gets invited on. I don't remember the last time we got invited back on CNN, Cenk, or any cable news network, but just put that out there.
Well, look, let me just follow up real quick on that. So Chuck Todd, that's the same Chuck Todd that last week was talking about, it turns out some Republicans were lying to us. But he said, it's okay, now we got to figure it out, okay? Turns out some politicians aren't being honest. But previous generation got duped into the Iraq war, et cetera, but now we got it straight. And but we pointed out, wait, all those people who got duped are still on air, and they were rewarded, not punished for being wrong. And then right now, MSNBC does the same exact thing. So Jason Johnson tells Chuck Todd, Bernie Sanders, he won't even come into the top 5 in Iowa, wiped out by August.
He's done.
Done. And the same MSNBC has him on now, we always knew he was gonna win among the progressives. I mean, they view him as a savior. Everybody always knew that. Like, it's unbelievable, stunning. By the way, on the same time period a year ago, when he was on with Chuck Todd, and he was announcing his candidacy, and they all declared him dead on arrival. I read to you all those quotes from Washington Post and other outlets, and I said they're 100% wrong. He will be incredibly strong. They said nobody will show up to his rallies anymore. I laughed and laughed and laughed, and I said no, he's gonna have bigger rallies than anyone else. I guarantee it. Who was right and who was wrong? And then who's on TV and the mainstream media and who isn't? People who are right are not invited on mainstream media. You get invited on to be wrong. It's not an accident. It's not a bug, it's the feature.
100%. Now, what's even more depressing about the corporate press and the way that they've handled this Bernie Sanders story is how this revelation that Brett Baier, of all people, on Fox News did a better job commenting on Bernie Sanders and his popularity. Take a look.
Fundraising numbers for Q4 are in, Brett, and they are impressive. Bernie Sanders, $34.5 million for the quarter. Pete Buttigieg, $24.7 million. To Elizabeth Warren, 17. Andrew Yang, 16.5. Joe Biden, 15 million. I'm sure you've got some analysis on that, but you have to put that up against the Trump campaign raking in 46 million as well.
You have to give Bernie Sanders credit. Remember, he's raising money with a big field that at one time was 20 candidates. He has $34.5 million for this quarter. And the key part is that they're all small donors. It's about $18 is the average donation to Bernie Sanders. And all of those people have a lot more that they could do.
So
that's amazing.
It's amazing when Fox News is more accurate, forget fair, is more accurate than the mainstream media is. What does that tell you about the mainstream media? And look, Fox News does propaganda for the right wing, but the corporate media does propaganda for corporations and for corporate Democrats and Republicans. So that's just the reality of it. Pick your poison. But to be fair to Brett Baier, he was right there. And he went on to say later in the segment, by the way, the Democratic Party is going to be panicking over this. And he's also right about that.
Yes, he is.
Oh my God, the Democratic Party might be represented by someone the Democratic voters agree with. Panic! Panic, he's not taking corporate money. What are we gonna do? Now, isn't that something you should celebrate? Like, oh my God, somebody that agrees with our principles and that isn't beholden to any kind of corruption. Well, you wouldn't celebrate that if the establishment and the leadership of the Democratic Party is actually part of the corruption.
Yes.
So, but again, the media, if you say that, you're banned. You're banned. You cannot criticize Biden, Pelosi, Schumer, et cetera. Now, but I want to get to an even more comical take. This is Bill Scher at Politico. So he sees the record numbers, unreal, wonderful, positive. No, not positive. Bill says, your periodic reminder that the small donor class is disproportionately white, wealthy, college educated, and much smaller than the overall primary electorate.
What?
So first of all, there's no data to back that up. The 1.2 million people that gave money to Bernie Sanders are disproportionately white. First of all, the country's disproportionately white, okay? So let's just make things up while we're at it. And then second of all, I wonder if the people in the wine cave were disproportionately white. We've seen the pictures, they're all white, okay? And corporate donors, they're lobbyists. Has there been any articles in Politico about, oh my God, the lobbyists are disproportionately white males that are very wealthy and all college educated? Not one article about that. I would be shocked if every lobbyist wasn't wealthy, college educated, and almost all white, right? But no. Corporate donors, big donors, wonderful. Small donors, white, well, what? Small donors are wealthy? That's the whole point, is that they're not wealthy.
Exactly.
They gave $18 on average. Take the truth and turn it on its head. You know what that's called? It's called propaganda, and it's called manufacturing consent. Noam Chomsky wrote about it decades ago, and this is manufacturing consent in action.
So I want to also give you one other comparison. It's not even a comparison. I want to show you how the New York Times has chosen to cover Bernie Sanders and how he's outraised every other Democratic candidate in the fourth quarter. So these are two headlines from the New York Times. The first one reads, this is amazing. Pete Buttigieg's campaign says it raised $24.7 million in the fourth quarter. So what? Okay, but all right, that's fine. Maybe they just want to cover Buttigieg. They're hyper focused on him. But then here's the one that really takes the cake. Biden rebounds, Warren slows, Sanders rolls, the latest on the 2020 money race.
So look, if you had the Buttigieg article by itself, it's fine, okay? But is that the big headline? Well, but when the Bernie numbers come out, shouldn't it be Bernie Sanders breaks a record? Okay, well, you don't want to give him credit because you hate him, whatever. But Bernie Sanders is #1 in money, in fundraising. No, he's mentioned third. But wait, is he third in the polling? Is he 8th in the polling? No, he's #1 in New Hampshire, #2 in Iowa, and closing, #2 nationally. But Biden this, Warren that, Sanders rolls. Yeah, fine. I mean, and all of you are lumped together in one article, but Buttigieg, who raised $10 million less than Bernie Sanders, and largely did it in wine caves. But you know what? You know who lives in a wine cave? The New York Times. They would love to be in a wine cave. They're the wine cave media. So of course they celebrate Buttigieg. Maybe they pop some champagne when Buttigieg's numbers came in. But when the Sanders money comes in, they're like, oh, well, I guess he's rolling, it's fine. I mean, just mention a third.
I mean, they celebrate the annual wine cave and it's called the White House Correspondents' Dinner, right? I mean, look, this isn't an accident. It's not an accident. Don't mistake this as, oh, maybe there's an oversight issue. No, it's intentional. It's intentional. There is, if Buttigieg, if any other candidate had outraised all the other Democrats in the field the way that Bernie Sanders had, I guarantee you that person would not be buried. That lead would not be buried. That would be front and center, right?
Well, we know it because Buttigieg didn't outraise anyone, and he was front and center. Bernie raises 10 million more than him, breaks a record, and he's mentioned third. Can you imagine, like, if the New York Times was like, and Buttigieg rolls? They would never do that. It's the beloved Buttigieg. So, and look, super last thing, because I did a whole long video about it. You check it out on youtube.com/TYT and also on TYT.com. Earlier today, I got so mad at another Politico article because they did a critique of Buttigieg. I was like, oh great, let me see, finally I found one, right? Nope, same exact thing as they did every other time. The radical left says this unfair thing about Pete Buttigieg. And what was his thesis? Why? Because they're jealous of him. Oh, okay. But Buttigieg, luckily, heroically fending off these unfair attacks. Can
you imagine if there were a story out of Burlington, right? Indicating that Bernie Sanders fired the first African American police chief because his donors told him to.
They would say disqualifying. It's over. It's over. It's over. But by the way, if you're saying, wait, Pete Buttigieg fired, or in that case, he asked him to resign and then demoted the first police chief who was black in South Bend? Yeah, and a lot worse than that. And there's cops on tape saying, white people are gonna be back in charge. We got Buttigieg's donors to get rid of the black police chief. If that was a story about Bernie, there is no one in the world who could argue that everyone in the national media wouldn't cover it to death until they tarred and feathered him and drove him out of the race. For Buttigieg, if you haven't heard it, I don't blame you, because it's a fact. It's on TYT.com. Our managing editor broke the story. It is indisputable. The South Bend Common Council profusely thanked them for the investigative work. But the New York Times and all the mainstream media is like, I don't see it, I don't see it. I don't think it's an issue at all. I mean, getting rid of black people from government, that's kind of awesome, isn't it? I mean, bravo, Pete Buttigieg. I mean, they don't belong anywhere, right? Let alone in a wine cave. Well, so they're the most biased people in America. So be super careful what you read in the media. Especially the New York Times. And look, who knows? To be fair to them, maybe they just don't trust us as a source because we're just a radio show. We're not, obviously. Yeah. Oh, by the way, guys, as always, we try to be over the top fair. I know they're like, oh yeah, you guys are actually honest about your opinion, so you can't be fair. Idiots. Okay, anyway, so just double check our facts. Yeah. But don't take our word for it. We're not asking you to take our word for it. We broke the story. Why don't you prove us wrong? Why don't you go out there and defend your buddy Buttigieg? New York Times said, will you, goddamn it, will you send somebody to South Bend, Associated Press, etc.? Where are you guys? Are the Young Turks wrong or are we right? So why don't you just go, I know, do what you do, defend Buttigieg. You can't, because you know we're right. And then that's amazing that you're ignoring that story. Amazing. But they don't care, they're purposely biased. All right, intentional and malicious. We are gonna take a break. When we come back, we have more for you, including the devastation in Australia as a result of the wildfires. Thanks for listening to the full episode of the Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk, and I'll see you soon.